Hi everyone, I'm Steve with digitalphotographygear.com, and today I'm going to be talking about Canon Macro lenses. And if you're unfamiliar with macro photography or just getting started in macro photography, basically what it is up-close photography, and photography of very small things to make them larger and bring out the detail, and it's very popular with insects, flowers, things of that nature, things you can't really appreciate the details of because they're so small, but when you take a large photograph of it you can really bring out all the detail and see the details of your subject. It's definitely a whole other world when you get up close to small things. Before I go into what their lenses are, I'm just going to talk about a reproduction ratio real quick. And reproduction ratio refers to the size of your subject on the sensor or film plane compared to the size of your subject in real life. A true macro lens has a reproduction ratio of 1:1, meaning that things appear life-size on your image sensor. So a picture of, let's say, a penny or a dime or other coin, it will take up the amount of space on your sensor as its actual size is in real life. So again, a true and classic macro lens has a magnification factor of 1:1, or the reproduction ratio, if you will. So Canon makes 6 macro lenses, and I've basically divided them into 3 separate categories. The classic and true macro lenses, there are 2 of them. They're both 100 millimeters, both f2.8. One is an L series lens, one is a non-L series lens. The non-L is really an excellent lens, especially if you're just getting started in macro photography. It's 100 millimeters, f2.8, very sharp, great image quality. Build quality is good. It's not as good as with the L lens, but it's definitely very good, especially for the price. But image quality is really where it's at. It's yeah, really sharp, wide open, stop it down a little bit, and it's sharp from corner to corner, and yeah, good color, good contrast. Just a great all-around lens. It has a USM, so autofocus is really fast and sharp and accurate and silent. When you step up to the 100 millimeter f2.8 L macro lens, it adds, which is actually what this lens is right here on a 5D Mark II. What the 100 millimeter L lens adds is a hybrid image stabilization, and what that will do for you is, as opposed to the regular image stabilization, what the hybrid does is it accounts for lens movement not only on a single plane moving side to side or up and down, but it also accounts for camera movement tilting that way or that way on an angle like that. So which is definitely a big plus when you're dealing with things that are so up close. It has both 100 millimeter macros have a minimum focus distance of 12 inches, and so that actually gives you a minimum working distance of just about 6 inches, because the minimum focus distance is measured from the sensor and the minimum working distance is measured from the front element. So you don't have to be a foot away from the front of the lens. You have to only be about 6 inches from the front of the lens. So that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, like I was saying, the hybrid IS of the 100L really, you can get down to shutter speeds at 1/5, 1/10 of a second, and they'll still be really sharp. Canon claims 4 stops of image stabilization, and yeah, I find that to be pretty accurate. Build quality is also improved over the non-L version, so yeah, that's it's definitely one of my I wouldn't say one of my favorite lenses, but it's definitely one of my most fun lenses. It's definitely, yeah, it makes a good portrait lens as well. Either the 100L or the 100 non-L make an excellent telephoto portrait lens. It's, yeah, very versatile and very good lens. Canon also makes two other lenses that are both macro. They're more dedicated macro lenses and definitely more for the serious macro photographer. One being the 180 millimeter f3.5L macro. It's like the big brother of the 100L. It's 180 millimeters, so it has an extra 80 millimeters of reach. It's a little slower at f3.5, but when you're talking about macro photography, you usually don't want a thin depth of field. You want a pretty deep depth of field when you're dealing with things that are so small. You want all of it to be in focus. It does have USM, but its focusing is actually very slow. One of the slowest of any Canon lens. But it's not necessarily a huge drawback, because with macro photography you don't necessarily need really fast autofocus. Actually, a lot of the times you just use manual focus because you have to be so precise, because your plane of focus is literally millimeters if you're dealing that precise and up close. But the 180 millimeter macro is good, definitely if you need a longer working distance. If you're taking pictures of let's say a bug that might fly away or something like that, you can't get up too close. You can definitely have a longer working distance and still get that 1-to-1 reproduction ratio. Another serious macro lens that Canon makes is the MPE 65 millimeter. That's a very specialized lens, definitely a dedicated macro lens, and it's really unlike any other lens that Canon makes. It has a variable magnification factor. It can either go 1-to-1 reproduction ratio all the way up to a 1-to-5 reproduction ratio. And it's rather expensive and, like I said, very specialized. So unless you are extremely serious about macro photography, I definitely wouldn't recommend it. You can't really use it for anything else aside from macro photography, but you can get up extremely close with that lens. But it also has a funky thing called you set your aperture and you have an effective aperture is what they call it. And it's there's some math involved, there's some funky optics involved, and I'm not really going to go into that in the video, but you definitely need a tripod or a strong flash in order to use that lens effectively. So that being said, if you know you need it, by all means go out and buy it, but if you're not sure whether you need it or not, then you probably don't need it. Canon makes two other macro lenses. They're what I like to call macro light lenses. They make 50mm f2.5 compact macro, which I think Canon kind of dropped the ball with that one. It doesn't have a true 1-to-1 magnification factor. Its build quality isn't all that great. It doesn't have a USM motor, and it's you really have to stop the lens down quite a bit in order for it to be sharp. But I feel like if you're going to get the 50mm compact macro, you should either get a 50mm prime like the 50 f1.4 or get the 100mm non-L macro. But the other one that they make, the EFS 60mm macro, is a good choice if you have an APS-C sensor SLR. That lens will not fit on a full frame because it's the EFS mount, but for an APS-C sensor, it's a good choice. It has the 1-to-1 magnification factor. It's lighter and smaller than a 100mm macro, and yeah, definitely a good choice if you have an APS-C sensor. So, but overall, I really like the 100mm, whether it's the L version or the non-L version. Makes a great lens whether you're doing macro or portraits or just general telephoto shooting. It's a very versatile lens, very fun lens. And once you start doing macro photography, you can it really opens up your eyes to the detail of smaller things. So I definitely recommend giving macro photography a try, and most people find that when they try it, they end up liking it. So those are my recommendations for Canon macro lenses, and join me next time when I review some more Canon gear and talk about some more photo subjects on digitalphotographygear.com.